Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar weekly discussion topic video. This is probably going to be the first in a series of, a kind of sub-series of these discussion videos where I talk about characters that I feel are underdeveloped and address basically what they were up to in the series, why they're underdeveloped, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and I think most importantly, how going forward in like the comics and so on, they can create a story arc to sort of give us that development. What is needed, given the strengths and weaknesses of that character, given their lack of development, to actually turn them into a more fleshed out character. So the first character we're going to be tackling here in this video is going to be Asami. Now, if you watched my Korra rewatch series, where I pretty heavily zoned in on Asami at certain points, you'll know that I definitely feel that she is, of the main characters of Korra, the most underdeveloped of all of them, to the point where I don't really feel like I know her all that well. When I think of Asami, I think of, like, the words that come to mind are like, pilot, driver, strong fighter, like shock glove, like inventions, future industries, Hiroshi. And that's all like this traits, skills that she has in a way. But very little of it is about her. None of those traits are specifically like positive things about her like personality, nor are they about her weaknesses. So the clear-cut thing with Asami is that as a character, I don't feel like I know her base personality all that well. Just the type of character that she is. She just feels a little generic when you take away just the traits. Whereas, like, you do that on a different character like Korra, and you take away the bending, the fact that she's the Avatar. She still is this, like, very, like, fierce, driven, but somewhat kind of naive character. And, that comes across really well. Her personality, who she is, comes across very well. That she has this fierceness, but whenever she hits a wall, she can't have those emotional moments. That's not something that came across particularly with Asami. Similarly, when you do it with, like, Mako, take away the detective skills, take away the fire bending, the lightning bending, and stuff like that. And he's this, he's an intelligent character, but then he also has this kind of cool aspect to him, but then he's also, like, at times one of the more goofy characters on the show when you really get down to it. He, is all about the rules and stuff like that, and has that kind of more, you think he's cool, but it actually there's a little bit of a kind of more boring, set in stone side to him. And then with Bolin, he's obviously the most humorous character. His personality comes across very clearly. Asami's doesn't, unfortunately. And perhaps it is just because she's meant to just be this sort of middle of the road, composed, kind of collected character. And that's fine. It's just, it doesn't really promote the most discussion for what we're going for here. So, very quickly, let's address what were her key arcs within the show and the comics. When you really break it down, like, her core arc is really the stuff that relates to her father. So it focuses in primarily on Book 1 and Book 4. With Book 1, it's her introduction, the Mako relationship, the breakup at the end. But most importantly, it's 107, the aftermath. And her making that decision after discovering this kind of big truth, this big betrayal in a way, that she hasn't known that her father has been a part of the Equalist movement for X amount of time. He's been a leader of this group. He actually hates benders and is one of the leading founding members of this organization. And the decision that she makes is to side against her only family member left to basically help her friends out in this situation. It's a big moment because she makes a decision that negatively impacts her and that she's on her own now, basically. And it's a huge moment for the character, but in a way, it's like the character's only big moment in the entire show. Like, of course, you have the fight with Hiroshi, which happens later on in the season with the help of Bolin, and she sort of gets her victory there. as Hiroshi kind of reveals himself to be a complete like zealot basically for the Equalists. And then in book 4 you have like that arc sort of come back. You have I think there's like 1 or 2 mentions in book 2 and 3 of her father and that she's still upset about what's happened, but no real focus. And then they decide that, okay, let's have Hiroshi like reach out to Asami. Let's have her go visit him, and initially not want to be any part of his life, but then realize that she would be better to have him, now that he's willing to change, part of her life, than it'd be better to have him part of her life than it would be to not have him part of it. That they were close in the past before all of this. He's able to get past all of it now, and we can go forward. The problem with that as her main arc is that, in a way, it's more of an arc about Hiroshi's growth. When you really break it down in terms of Asami, it's her big decision. It's her decision to side against him, and then it's her decision to sort of accept him back into her life. But it's Hiroshi who actually goes through the growth sort of off screen. And it's always a case of like Asami's big moments always relate to Hiroshi. She does have another plot in book 2, and it's the future industries business plot, that Hiroshi's ruined the reputation because of book 1 basically. Asami has to get it back on track, but it's in a very low position. So she has to get the help of Varric. She signs a business deal with him, in part thanks to Bolin. But then the whole Mako being framed thing happens with the sting, and basically her company is ruined, and she has to basically sign the entire thing over to Varric to save it. And then it's revealed that like, oh, Mako's been framed for this, while the whole she's got back together with Mako thing, kind of, but it's not really confirmed, and it's dropped at the end of the book. What's happening there? And so a lot you realize that a lot of her arc early on was related to romance also, and she's probably the one where it like is the biggest percentage of her kind of overall plot was romance stuff basically, because again they come back with her later on with the Korra relationship, and given that she hasn't had much development elsewhere, it sort of becomes a problem in that relationship as well. But even within the business plot, it becomes more of Mako's plot, because it's more of Mako trying to prove that like, no, I know this information, it is Varric, why won't anyone believe me? And with Asami, it's just her, being upset that she's lost her company and everything seems to be going wrong for her. But then when Mako's proven right, it basically gets Asami all that stuff back. So it's just kind of Mako solving this problem that in the end helps Asami, rather than it being about Asami sort of like getting her company back herself. Book 3, she's actually not up to basically anything. Like, none of the plot directly relates to Asami. She's just there because obviously she supplies the airship that the team goes around on, and it makes sense that she's part of the group because she's a member of Team Avatar. But none of the plot points are like Asami has like a side plot that does this, whereas other characters do have their side plots. The new characters obviously have their reasons to be part of this in a bigger way, but Asami's just there. And the notable thing is that they pair her up with Korra a lot. So Asami and Korra end up having a lot of scenes together, but as we discussed in the rewatch, very few of those scenes have any substance to them. Just placing two characters on screen and having them do kind of idle chit-chat doesn't instantly, mean development for their relationship as friends, let alone as a romantic kind of couple. And that, I think, is the absolute case with Korra and Asami in Book 3, where I think the only notable scenes are like the scene where they talk about Mako in the car in like the first couple of episodes, and then perhaps her talking to Korra in the wheelchair in like the last episode. Everything in the middle, to me, has very little to it. It's just Asami being there because it sort of makes sense that she's there. And there's no real substance to her being there. There's no plot. And I thought it was very telling that they just didn't have anything for her in that book. In Book 4, they use her where, like, she has a really good reputation in the city. The city's kind of hired Future Industries to like rebuild the infrastructure of the city with the railways and so on. Then they have her come back into play with the reunion of the team back together, and they addressed like the letter writing and stuff like that. but it's so vague, not really focused on all that much, that like you don't get much out of it on like in terms of Asami's character. And then again, it's only the Hiroshi plot, once it comes back into play, that's a real focus until the very end. And they have the, I suppose, better scenes with Korra and Asami, and they start their relationship together. So far in Turf Wars, I think it's been alright, but the problem in terms of Asami has been that Asami is so overshadowed by Korra. Korra is by so far like it's such a lopsided relationship, because Korra is the most developed character in the show. We know everything about her. Whereas with Asami, as you saw at the start, like I really struggled to like, what is her personality? Like, I know these like things about her, that she's a pilot, but like that is not the basis for like the interaction between Korra and Asami. So you can see where the problem is, in that they're basing all of the development sort of off like Korra in a way, and not a whole lot of it on Asami. And that's where I'm really looking for them to like do something with that. But the main idea being that like, okay, Asami's helping out with the relief effort in the aftermath of Book 4. You know, that seems to be the main thing that they sort of have her do, that because she's sort of rich, they can always have her supply a vehicle or just assist with aid in some way. But again, it's not really character all that much outside of getting across that she's a kind person, which is the case for most of the characters anyway. So, you know, the strengths of the character are obviously that she's skilled on a lot of fronts. She's intelligent, of course. You know, she's independent because she is kind of on her own. She doesn't really have her family for most of the book, and that's fine. But again, it's nothing particularly like unique or like incredibly interesting on that front. It's just that like she's a good fighter, she's like an inventor, which are traits that other characters have as well. So the whole package together doesn't really stand out as much. And then in terms of weaknesses, it's just kind of like, well, I don't think we know enough about her personality to really get a massive handle on what her weaknesses are. The only thing I'd maybe put in here is like from Turf Wars, the fact that while Korra wants to be really sort of like open with their relationship and like tell everyone, Asami is more leaning on the side of like, no, let's slowly reveal it. Let's focus on the two of us first, and then people will gradually know. And even that's kind of just like, that's a pretty reasonable approach to take if you're kind of a little uncertain about things. This relationship has just started and so on, but you know, I don't really know what to make of it. I think a lot will depend on if Korra ever kind of calls out Asami on something like that. Whereas I think there's always been a sense of like Asami addressing like Korra's flaws, and we don't really know if that's even possible the other way, because I don't know what Asami's flaws necessarily are. So, leading into, I suppose, the focus of the discussion, how do they improve the character? What are the problems that they actually need to address? Well, fundamentally, it's just severe lack of kind of screen time, focus on who the character is personally, and just getting to know who Asami is more. And just focus on her individually, and not on her and how she feels about her father, or not on her as she's Korra's girlfriend, or Mako's girlfriend, or something like that. Just Asami's plot that is Asami's. She can maybe be helped by another character, but the core of the arc is Asami. So, what are the options for this? What is there with her character that they maybe could have done, but maybe left out? Well, one of those things, I think the most obvious one, is Yasuko, who is Asami's mother. Now, I think it's an unfortunate thing just from the get-go. We only know that name because it was revealed after the show came to an end, when they put out family trees on Nick.com. Her name was never revealed in the show, even though we did get to see a picture of what she looks like in the show. But I think by telling the backstory of Asami, and I suppose focusing specifically on the death of Yasuko and what happened there, that allows you to give Hiroshi more development, Asami more development, and just the entire Sato family more development. And if you frame it in the way of like, you make it meaningful how Asami's telling the story, more than likely Korra asks about it, and it's Asami telling this story to Korra as a way to, I suppose, the two of them to better get to know each other and their big issues in life, and this being one of Asami's biggest ones. And what you can do here is that we know nothing about Yasuko in terms of personality. So you can do this idea that, okay, Asami has some clear traits that she clearly gets from Hiroshi. The mechanical side of her, the engineer, the inventing kind of side of things, absolutely. The pilot, the driver, that is another kind of skill that kind of came from Hiroshi. The business kind of skills, a lot of these skill side of things tend to come from her father. But personality-wise, Hiroshi actually almost feels like a more defined character, and he feels very different than Asami. So, if you develop Yasuko as a character, you can do the simple thing of basically saying that, okay, here's Asami's mother, here's what she was like. Asami actually gets a lot of her personality traits from her mother, and then the skill traits from her father, and you develop Asami by developing her parents, basically. And then you can use potentially like the idea that telling this story sort of, and Asami being in this relationship with Korra, maybe sparks this sense of like a new aspect of Asami's personality comes out. Or potentially, if you develop a much younger Asami as being kind of different pre the death of her mother versus afterwards, that's a clear-cut way to get like a maybe more little energetic side of Asami to come out. By the freedom of finally talking about what happened to someone like Korra. And that also solves that problem of like the like plot-wise, that it would explain also Hiroshi's motivations, and potentially also that's a way to tell your story where you find out how Hiroshi and Amon met. Because the other thing that's in here is also the fact that I think it would also be a thing that would be on Asami's mind. That, okay, Hiroshi betrayed her by keeping this all from her. But if he believed so strongly that benders were such a big problem, it is this kind of shocking thing that none of that ever seemed to come across to Asami. That if he really hated benders that much, he purposely hid it from his daughter. That he never in any way leaned into kind of forcing Asami down the path of also growing up with a hatred, a issue with benders. That he shielded her completely from that to keep her out of it. That's a very interesting perspective to have, because there's very clearly like this other timeline in a way where you could see him doing that, where she's completely on his side. She is one of the Equalist generals at some point, and she hates the benders just as much as he does. So the fact that he didn't do any of that, that's a kind of telling thing, in that he kind of protected her from it and only tried to get her involved once she found out. That's another aspect to kind of come in on and maybe like get some development out of the fact that, Korra pointing out how strong Asami is for making that decision, like getting some real focus on like, okay, look, this is one of your biggest moments, Asami. As Korra, this is how I felt about you making that decision at that point in time, given how hard it must have been for you. It's a way to develop her relationship with Korra a bit more, develop her backstory, the mystery of just like Yasuko being this kind of character out there who right now is basically just the tragic backstory. Add some depth that you develop a lot of the characters involved in Asami's life, and you give a pathway to get her character come out. You see her when she's younger, if there's any difference in the character because of the traumatic incidents that happened. As well as that, we have the mention of like in the comics right now, Wonyoung Koom. I'd also like to see potentially like Hiroshi and Asami actually have a fairly good relationship in some of the scenes that we see. I'd love to see like Hiroshi teaching her some of this business stuff, teaching her how to drive a car when she was like really young or something like that, and maybe some sort of an incident where Wonyoung Koom comes in and Hiroshi disagrees with him, and there's some incident with Asami or something like that. That's a way to tie everything together if you really have to. As for anything else with her, this is where it's sort of unfortunate, like, because there's so kind of, in a way, little there, you can almost do anything but it also means that there's not a lot of clear pathways to just go off to create a story. There's not a lot of pre-made stuff to go off. Like, say, an Iroh. There's like 5 or 6 different stories, clear-cut stories you could tell with Iroh just based on little hints of backstory that we have. Not necessarily the case with Asami, just because of the lack of depth. Another potential idea I have, I don't think it's as well fleshed out, is just the idea of like, obviously she's a really good driver. We got the hint of like she has like a test track at least for the cars. What if they did some sort of a like racing series type thing, or a one-off race event where like Asami enters it like for charity or something like that? Maybe it's like a Le Mans style thing where like it's her plus like Korra and Mako or something like that as the drivers for the team, and they do like a third of the race or something like that, and some incident happens, but it's an Asami story. She is the focus of all of this, that she has to like fix the car really quickly when something happens, and you're addressing some of the skills that she has, of course, but you also get some of that kind of, you know, how kind of feisty, intense she is on the track, and how she's really eager to win. That's a cool aspect to get across here, of just the teamwork of like the whole like race team or whatever way you do it. And it's a way to tell a more kind of like sports style story, like a pro bending thing, but with racing. And, you know, really develop the fact that there are other sports out there in the world. I think that would be really, really fun, because you could obviously do the kind of classic sports thing of developing like the enemy drivers and like the different cars that they have, and focus on like driving technique a bit if you wanted to. You know, really turn it into an Asami solo story, addressing like the fact that, you know, she's really into this sort of stuff. So it would be a little bit more technical on the driving side of things. And you could potentially have some off the racetrack stuff happen, where she's required to do some stuff, like maybe there's some corruption going on here, some like bribery happening in the background, and she has to sort it out potentially, and the team avatar helps her. You know, it's something where like she gets to be the spotlight character because it's her in her element. Whereas like a lot of the big moments in Avatar tended to be the benders, so like Korra, Mako, and Bolin fight the villains, but Asami's just the non-bender character, so she has to be in the background. Other than that, like there's always you can always do like some sort of a business plot if you really want to again. And I think they're sort of doing that right now in Turf Wars, with the whole idea that like she is kind of helping the city to regrow using her wealth and influence. But there's always the danger with those type of stories that it just gets a little bit too like focused on sort of mundane, you know, everyday politics, and isn't particularly interesting, because it's just her, you know, cutting ribbons at events and just like building construction happening, rather than being a kind of proper, you know, character arc type thing. Now, of course, I'm saying all of this before Turf Wars Part 3 comes out. That book could very well have some proper development for the character, in that I would hope that potentially Asami is almost finding some way to get herself out of being, you know, captured, rather than needing Korra to come in and help her. But is there enough time to have an actual character arc? That's where I'm not entirely sure. I have my doubts about how good Turf Wars Part 3 is going to be, but, you know, there should be some nice Korra and Asami moments. Beyond that, that's where I think it is difficult. I don't think Asami has as many kind of pathways to get to development as the other characters, just because I think at a base level she kind of isn't as interesting as the other characters. But I think the backstory stuff, Yasuko, and a way to connect a lot of plot points together, develop Asami, Yasuko, and Hiroshi all at the same time, by also obviously focusing heavily on Asami's development in potentially like the real world reason for telling that story being Asami telling it to Korra, and cutouts to them talking about things. That to me makes sense as a way to like cover every aspect going on. Korra Asami plus developing Asami as a character and the backstory. one final thing before the end I should bring up with Asami was, I suppose, what is, in reflection, a potentially missed opportunity. Again, we can't be certain about how it would have been executed, but the initial idea for Asami as a character back in book 1 was that she was, I suppose, brought into being in a way, created as a character to be one of the villains in book 1. They were initially going to have her be on the bad side of things in book 1. Now, again, this is where I don't really know if they said exactly how far into production they got before they made this switch. I think it was fairly early on when they actually did make this. But just that idea that they were considering having Asami be a villain for the first book is very interesting, in that I think that would have been a really cool way to more or less fill in the first 2 seasons of her development as a character, in that without changing book 1 as it is too much, basically just having her be a villain from the start up until a certain point would have actually really worked quite well, in that you still have her start the relationship with Mako, but now it is under the guise of her kind of obviously lying about it, being more undercover, but that she in a way has been sort of grown up her entire life, treated by Hiroshi to dislike benders, and is doing everything she can to help the equalist movement. The impression I get is that Asami almost would have been basically the lieutenant in a way, maybe not treated the exact same way, but have that role of like a commander out there for the chi blockers, and Amon is still the leader of the equalists, and Hiroshi is the main kind of inventor guy. But I think this would have allowed you to have a little bit more interesting arc than she actually already had in book 1, where you have to have her come to terms with the fact that she's suddenly around all of these benders and it's okay, there's no problem, and she's realizing that what her father is saying about all benders isn't true, and suddenly the relationship with Mako goes from being this fake one into potentially a real one. Friendship with Korra, friendship with Bolin turns into something real, and she suddenly has to make a decision between her friends and her father, and it adds, I think it potentially adds a little bit more of a back and forth to that decision, in that she's on the bad side already, and now she's siding with what she's known all her life versus the new people she's grown to kind of trust. Whereas the other side of things, like, while there's still obviously doubts about it, it's a little easier of a decision for her, because it's like sudden betrayal from her father, so there's like immediate reason for her to kind of dislike that. Whereas on the other side of things, of her kind of coming from like the opposite perspective, it is her siding against what she's kind of known for all this time, and then you still you have her change sides, but there still be this lack of trust in a way. And that is something where like book 1 can play out exactly as it does. It eventually has Asami versus Hiroshi. Bolin helps her out in the end. It plays out the exact same way. But then you start book 2, and suddenly Asami is now a good character, but she still has to deal with the aftermath of the fact that she was a villain. She lied to her friends for so long, and has to sort of redeem herself. So she still has that business arc of trying to bring the company back, but she also would have the idea of still having to sort of redeem herself to her friends. And that potentially happening at the end of book 2. And that way, that's 2 books of arc for her. And even if you don't have a lot for her in book 3, you can come back with the Hiroshi reunion, and it just feels a little bit more fleshed out, and that is literally just by making one different decision early on in book 1. Again, we don't know exactly how far in production that decision would have been made, but my interpretation, if you just switch that decision, I think would allow for a little bit more of an arc. I get why they made the decision to have her be the good character, in that they just wanted to have a lot of the characters be on the good side and so on. From their perspective, it perhaps didn't work, but they were only thinking about book 1. In the reflection of all 4 books, I think maybe that decision should have been reversed, but that's just my thoughts on that sort of missed opportunity, like, within the show for the character. But that's my thoughts on the character. So, like, I think it comes across that, like, oh, maybe I don't like the character. I like Asami, it's just I find it very difficult to talk about the character because we know so little about her. In that, like, I can talk for ages about Korra and all the unique arcs that she's been on and the depth of her character, and the same with a lot of other characters. But you can't really do the same with Asami, and that's, I think, the most unfortunate thing about it. In that, I think, the character design is really cool. And as I said, she is kind of like a nice character, and she's got some good skills and traits. It's just the personality hasn't come across yet. So that's basically the end of the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on Asami as a character, some of the suggestions I had for how to develop her, but definitely in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts are on basically ideas to improve the character, where they could tell a sort of story that really gets the development that she needs out, and so on. But yeah, next video I'll probably do it on the Red Lotus members, with the unique aspect of the video being that I will attempt to, I suppose, in a way almost create the backstory for the 4 Red Lotus members in the next video. So that'll be next week's discussion topic video. But yeah, that's been this week's one for Asami. So thanks for watching, and bye.